He is alive. He is here. Oh, whoop. Look out. What up, folks? Welcome back. Welcome. Welcome back to another live show. It is 5 o'clock p.m. Oaxaca time here in Mexico. Hope everybody is well. I've been getting a buttload, which is a academic scientific term of measurement. I've been getting a buttload, I tell you, messages to look into a fellow by the name of Pisco. Is that his real name? And his inability to basically see anti-Semitism in Hasan Piker. I've made no judgments yet. I saw a little bit of Destiny's video outlining this. That paired with quite a few of requests by way of Discord, email, couple X messages telling me to look into this. And I am interested. So let's strap in and look at some facts. Let's look at some data. Oh, but Travis, that's boring. Too bad. Too effing bad. Now, I have to say, first, right off the bat, I don't know anything, for the most part, about Pisco. I've gotten to know quite a bit about Hasan Piker with the deep dives I've done recently into his work as to him as a human being. And we're going to keep moving down that line of specificity and doing some assessments so we get a nice, clear picture of who we're talking about, who we're thinking about. Okay. Let's look at some information. So we have a Pangburn analysis here. Pisco plus Hasan Piker. Antisemitism, platforming, and functional normalization. Focused Forensic Report version 2. Triple resolution edition. This is a source-controlled investigation of Pisco's anti-Semitism definition and Hasan-related coalition posture. Hasan Piker's direct anti-Semitic content cases, promotion, platforming, and normalization through guests or extremist-aligned actors. Contradictions and the evidentiary boundary between anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, civil liberties, defense, strategic alliance, and adoption. And this report was prepared today, August 17th, 2026. So let's first look at what the report is going to show. Is the report going to show that Pisco is personally anti-Semitic? That is not established in this report. Is this report going to show that Pisco's definition of anti-Semitism underreaches? This is a substantial concern found in this report. Pisco threshold symmetry. This is a material concern. There's also a partial hold in this section that we'll take a look at. Pisco ideological endorsement of Hasan? That's not established by this report. Pisco strategic/civil liberties support of Hasan? That is supported. Pisco functional normalization risk, moderate to high concern. Hasan repeated anti-Semitic content. This is supported in identified statements. Hasan anti-Zionism, Hasan anti-Zionism automatically anti-Semitic? No. Hasan platform/promotes anti-Semitic guest content. This is supported with response level qualifications. Hasan adopted every Finkelstein anti-Semitic proposition. That's false. That would be a false inference. But the question on that one is, did Hasan adopt any of Finkelstein's anti-Semitic propositions in their recent discussion? Hasan extremist normalization risk. There is a material concern here. So we have two interacting paradoxes. Here's the executive thesis. Pisco's intent firewall paradox. His lawyerly demand for intent is an important safeguard against false accusations, but can become under-inclusive when it treats subjective motive as if it were the only way to classify message-level anti-Semitic content. Hasan's anti-monolicity paradox. He has explicitly rejected collective Jewish monolithicity and denied anti-Semitic intent. Yet, the expanded record contains several statements that independently reproduce anti-Semitic structures. Most strongly, hereditary degradation aimed at Haredi/Orthodox Jews. And a dual loyalty, quote, Israel first attack on a Jewish congressman in a non-Israel dispute. The result is not a guilty by association report here. It is a proposition by proposition analysis of content, host conduct, correction, platforming, and foreseeable normalization. Yes. Welcome back, everyone. By the way, I'm just taking a look at the chat quickly, make sure everything's fired up here. Oh, someone actually gave me a tip to screen capture the chat. Let me do that right now. Let me screen capture the chat. Window capture. Boom, boom. YouTube. There we go. Let me screen capture the chat so it's on the screen. If you go, Uma, if you go to pang-burn.com/analysis, you are going to find at the top of the analysis page all of the information that outlines the Pang-Burn analysis system. You will see all of it there. There. We got the chat on the screen. Maybe I should put it beside me. I guess we could, yeah. Try that. So it'll answer all your questions, almost certainly, about how the Pang-Burn analysis system functions. Okay, let's continue. So this is a triple resolution deliverable. The reason why I call this one triple resolution is because not all analyses that I run are this wide-reaching, this deep. This one in particular is 3 times the typical layering and depth. So we have in this version exactly 96 claim units to look at, 144 behavior/platform units, and 45 deep cases, plus a dedicated contradiction ledger, expanded Hasan direct content section, guest platforming taxonomy, extremist normalization section, framework comparison, well-being model, and adversarial self-audit. Counts are curated research units, not lifetime denominators, of course. Okay. What version 2 adds? We don't need to look at that. Go through to the data. Let's look at the executive summary. And like I said off the beginning, I know very little about Pisco. I've been getting a lot of messages about looking into Pisco and Pisco's view on anti-Semitism, specifically in its that view's relationship to Hasan. So we're just going to look at the data today and see what we find. This is something that Destiny has been covering over on his channel. So I'll send him this report and the data. If we find any errors that we need to correct, we'll correct those before we send this over to Stephen. And he may or may not be interested in going through this. So let's look at the executive summary here. Pisco. The expanded record still does not establish direct anti-Jewish animus, collective Jewish guilt claims, Jewish control tropes, or identity denial by Pisco. His strongest positive evidence remains his willingness to call Nick Fuentes clearly anti-Semitic, his refusal to equate Israel criticism with anti-Semitism, his cross-ideological civil liberties defense, and his willingness to criticize Hasan on other issues. Whenever you see in brackets here, this is referencing our sourcing ledger. So there is a source listed here, and we will see that sourcing ledger at the end of this document. Pisco's principal vulnerability is definitional, a standard that makes anti-Semitism depend too heavily on provable internal intent risks misclassifying known social content. We get into this same issue with the demonstration of racism or systemic racism. People are always looking for that direct, explicit smoking gun. You know, someone wearing wearing blackface and screaming the N-word constantly at black people, and then they're like, okay, yeah, now it's racist. There are implicit racisms. There is implicit anti-Semitism. So we're going to look at all of that today as well. The Holocaust denial edge case is the cleanest demonstration. A philosophical quote, not necessarily about private motive, can be true in a contrived modal sense, while still being a poor operational answer to whether Holocaust denial functions as anti-Semitism. The JDA and USHMM classify denial/minimization as anti-Semitic. Academic content annotation methods likewise do not require mind reading before identifying anti-Semitic messages. So we're going to be making reference, and we can look down here. So we have JDA here, JDA 01, Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism, which is a framework protective of anti-Zionism, flags Holocaust denial, collective guilt, etc. And this is from the Jerusalem Declaration. We're going to hear from Nexus as resources of meanings and usages of anti-Semitism. Nexus Guide to Identifying Anti-Semitism in Debates About Israel. Framework Separating Israel Criticism from Anti-Semitism flags dual loyalty / Jewish control. The Nexus Project. Then we're also going to hear from IHRA working definition / examples, widely used framework, examples contextual, not automatic. And then USHMM, Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism. So these are going to be our three main academic working sources for anti-Semitism. Historical / educational source. And of course, that is the USHMM. Let's go back up here. So JDA and USHMM classify denial / minimization of the Holocaust as anti-Semitic. Academic content annotation methods likewise do not require mind reading before identifying anti-Semitic messages. Hasan. This version 2 now finds repeated anti-Semitic content in identified statements, with the strongest high confidence cases being targeted hereditary degradation of Haredi / Orthodox Jews and the, quote, straight up Israel first framing of Jewish Representative Jake Auchincloss, in a dispute about a Nazi tattoo. These cases are stronger than generic anti-Zionism allegations because they do not depend on treating Israel criticism as anti-Semitism. Hasan also has real counter-evidence. He says he is not anti-Semitic, describes himself as anti-Zionist, explicitly rejected Jewish monolithicity in the Finkelstein interview, challenged some of Finkelstein's sweeping generalizations, and corrected the, quote, not a war claim. These facts matter. They make a simplistic private hatred diagnosis less defensible, even while message level findings remain. Platforming. The report sharply separates hosting from adoption. Finkelstein made multiple high-confidence collective Jewish power, collective blame, and identity denial statements on Hasan's platform. Hasan sometimes delayed challenge or failed to correct exact propositions, but he also materially challenged others. Therefore, quote, Hasan endorsed every anti-Semitic Finkelstein statement is false inference. Quote, Hasan platforms severe anti-Semitic content and sometimes moderated it inadequately is supported. Extremist alignment. Hasan's positive rhetoric regarding Hamas, Houthi resistance, and Hezbollah-related symbolism increases normalization concern, especially because some of those movements have explicit anti-Semitic ideological histories. But political support for a militant movement is not itself proof that Hasan adopts every anti-Jewish proposition associated with it. Version 2 of this report reports extremist normalization and anti-Semitism separately and only links them when the content warrants it. Contradictions. The report distinguishes formal contradiction from behavioral inconsistency. Pisco can defend Hasan's rights and criticize him without contradiction. Hasan can sincerely believe he opposes anti-Semitism while still uttering anti-Semitic tropes. That is a norm implementation conflict, not proof he secretly hates Jews. The most serious contradiction-like questions are Pisco's possible differential intent thresholds across prejudice categories and Hasan's explicit anti-monolithicity norm versus his targeted group essentialization rhetoric. So bottom line here, Pisco direct anti-Semitism, not established. Pisco, definitional underreach, substantial concern. Pisco, functional normalization risk, moderate to high. Hasan, repeated anti-Semitic content supported in identified statements. Anti-Zionism alone is not anti-Semitism. Extremist normalization concern is material. Finkelstein guessed anti-Semitism is not automatically transferred to Hasan. Person level private animus remains a stronger, less necessary proposition. Welcome, everyone. Make sure you hit that like button if you appreciate data analysis, getting down to what the facts actually are. Welcome, welcome. So let's look at part one, definitions, scope, and evidence rules. 4 levels that must not be collapsed. So we have level, what is being classified, evidence burden. So message/content. Does a statement reproduce a known anti-Jewish trope, collective guilt, identity denial, hereditary degradation, Holocaust denial, etc.? And then evidence burden would be text, context can be sufficient. Motive is relevant, but not always necessary. We have conduct/platforming. Does a host amplify, normalize, challenge, contextualize, or repeatedly expose an audience to anti-Semitic content? Requires host response and effect analysis. Silence alone is not belief. Discrimination/intent. Was a person treated differently because Jewish identity motivated the action? Intent evidence often central. And person level label. Is a stable public pattern strong enough to characterize the person as anti-Semitic? Highest burden. Avoid when conduct level descriptions are more precise. So one thing I've been dealing with is my eyesight. Like, I have this blown up to 150%, but I'm pretty sure I need glasses now at this point in my life, because for some words, they kind of blur out and then they come into focus. I've never had that before in my life. I am going to be 40 next year, so heading into my glory years, I guess. Framework triangulation. The JDA, useful boundary, protects anti-Zionism, BDS, one state, and harsh Israel criticism, flags Holocaust denial, collective guilt, and classic hostility to Jews as Jews. Strong falsification source against pro-Israel overclassification. Nexus rejects automatic anti-Zionism is equal to anti-Semitism, flags dual loyalty, Jewish control, and identity denial. Current watchdog criticizes Hasan's Haredi, quote, inbred defense, especially high value. And this the bracket on the far right is talking about why include this. It's especially high value in disputed left Israel cases. IHRA includes contextual examples involving Nazi comparisons, collective responsibility, and power tropes. We saw a lot of that collective responsibility coming out of Norm Finkelstein in his conversation with Hasan, that I don't think Hasan really tried to refute. For the most part, he was just kind of nodding along with a lot of it. Widely used, treated contextually rather than mechanically. USHMM, like we already went through, treats Holocaust denial as a form of anti-Semitism and documents its conspiracy structure. Why would we include this? For historical educational anchor. And then academic annotation work codes anti-Semitic messages from text/context, makes false positive/false negative boundaries explicit, shows operational classification need not wait for private motive proof. So that's going to be a lot of what we talk about. A lot of people think that you need to have the private motive proof in order for something to be truly anti-Semitic. You don't need that. When we look at the academic level assessments and adjudication of statements and whether or not they are anti-Semitic or not, we don't need the private motive proof. We don't need what the person was trying to do or was intending to say. Even without that direct intentional evidence, we can make determinations about whether something is anti-Semitic or not. Newly Born Corn says on the Vanguard podcast, Pisco referred to Hasan critics as bad actors. I'm going to fact check that because I would, it seems like it might be relevant to this report. Let me just. Okay, yeah, perfect. All right. Okay. Back at it. Or wait, was that the right window? Yes, it is. Okay, let's look at host response / adoption firewall. So there's by a host who's hosting a program, there would be explicit adoption. Speaker accepts proposition in own words or relies on it. Active amplification, speaker adds evidence, examples, or a stronger inference. Partial / affiliative agreement like response with unclear scope, not blanket adoption. Non-challenge, so consequential statement passes without meaningful correction. Moderation, evidence only. Challenge / correction, speaker disputes, narrows, fact checks, or rejects the proposition. Distancing, speaker marks disagreement or introduces a limiting principle. Ambiguous, crosstalk, sarcasm, clipped context, or metadata prevents safe inference. Denominator firewall, we have 96 claims and 144 behavioral units that have been deliberately curated for high information anti-Semitism / platforming questions. They're not every statement by Pisco or Hasan. No percentage of, quote, everything they say is computed. Threefold increase in resolution is not a threefold increase in guilt. Source hierarchy. Original self-authored post / video and supplied primary transcript controls. Controls what was said. Official / judicial / archival record controls, legal or institutional facts. Peer-reviewed / academic and high-quality research controls. Historical / social claims. Major independent reporting is used for current context and direct interviews. Advocacy organizations are useful for frameworks, leads, and documented quotations, but are not treated as neutral merits arbiters. Reddit / community summaries are leads only and never control a serious quotation or contradiction finding. Let's look at the version 2 focus status matrix. So we have question, status, confidence, and reason. So direct anti-Jewish animus by Pisco. This hasn't been established. There's no direct slur, collective guilt, identity denial, or anti-Jewish hostility pattern located. Pisco anti-Semitism definition underreach. We have substantial concern here. We're going to look into that. Holocaust denial edge case is materially narrower than JDA USHMM operational practice. Pisco threshold symmetry across left / right prejudice. There's a material concern here. Fuentes comparison is established. Alleged mega racism asymmetry remains secondary until primary transcript lock. Pisco civil liberties defense of Hasan. This is supported. Let's see. Supported core. Pisco ideological endorsement of Hasan. That is not established. There's substantive criticism and issue separation that exists. Pisco functional normalization risk. Moderate to high concern. Narrow classification plus coalition shelter can reduce correction with regards to anti-Semitism. Magnitude unquantified. Hasan direct anti-Semitic content supported in identified statements. We will go through those. Hereditary slur and I think Auchincloss dual loyalty case are strongest. Okay, we'll look at those in more detail. Hasan anti-Zionism itself, not anti-Semitic by default. Hasan Nazi/Zionism analogies. These are context dependent. They're inflammatory. Framework disagreement prevents automatic classification. Hasan Finkelstein platforming is supported. Hasan adoption of every guest trope. That would be a false inference. Hasan extremist normalization risk. There's a material concern there. Global person level quote, Hasan is an anti-Semite label. That's not required or qualified for this report. Repeated conduct level findings are stronger and more precise than private motive certainty. Part 3, let's look at Pisco. Anti-Semitism definition, Hasan support, and contradictions. Number 1, what this report still does not find. The expanded past did not locate a high-confidence Pisco statement expressing hostility towards Jews as Jews, collective Jewish guilt, Jewish global control rhetoric, hereditary degradation of Jews, Holocaust denial, or denial of a Jewish identity because of political disagreement. This negative finding is deliberately narrow. Absence in the reviewed corpus is not proof of lifetime absence. The Holocaust denial edge case. The Kick channel currently displays a clip titled, quote, Holocaust denial is not necessarily anti-Semitism. This report preserves the title as public metadata, but does not assume Pisco personally wrote it. The associated controversy is still analytically useful because it captures the definitional fault line. Is private anti-Jewish intent a necessary condition for labeling anti-Semitic content? The best Pisco steelman is a modal one. It is easy to imagine a bizarre Holocaust denier whose internal state is confusion rather than Jew hatred, but operational anti-Semitism frameworks do not ask whether conscious hatred is metaphysically necessary in every possible mind. JDA explicitly treats Holocaust denial / minimization as anti-Semitic, while simultaneously protecting sweeping anti-Zionist political positions. USHMM treats Holocaust denial as anti-Semitism because denial historically functions through conspiracy narratives about Jews fabricating or exploiting the genocide. A rigorous formulation is, quote, subjective anti-Jewish hatred may not be logically necessary in every imaginable Holocaust denier, but Holocaust denial is operationally and historically classified as anti-Semitic content. Motive uncertainty should not erase message level classification. The Fuentes counterexample improves the diagnosis. Pisco has called Nick Fuentes clearly anti-Semitic in a speaker attributed transcript, that prevents an unfair caricature that Pisco will never use the label without a confession. The higher resolution concern is threshold asymmetry. Does he demand more intent evidence for anti-Semitism when the speaker is coalition adjacent, anti-Zionist, or left-wing than when the speaker is a paradigmatic far-right anti-Semite? Hasan support must be atomized. We have category evidence and report meaning. Civil liberties. Hasan included in a broader First Amendment defense, positive symmetry evidence, not endorsement. Government pressure. Pisco objects to border/questioning implications for protected speech. This is a rights concern, not anti-Semitism. Electoral strategy. Trump versus Hasan hypothetical. Relative coalition preference only. Long-form engagement, quote, answering the Hasan question and current anti-Semitism debates shows active coalition definition engagement. Substantive disagreement. Public criticism of Hasan's economic/political framing. Strong counter evidence to blanket ideological adoption. Possible reputational shelter. High threshold anti-Semitism definition applied near Hasan controversy. Functional normalization risk, not proof of shared animus. The unresolved symmetry question. Secondary contemporaneous discussion alleges that Pisco uses a looser burden when labeling MAGA Republicans racist than when labeling anti-Semitism, and reports a whites-only store hypothetical. One more time. Secondary contemporaneous discussion alleges that Pisco uses a looser burden when labeling MAGA Republicans racist than when labeling anti-Semitism, and reports a, quote, whites-only store hypothetical. These would be extremely important if primary locked, because Pangburn symmetry requires equivalent prejudice standards. This report explicitly refuses to convert community paraphrase into a Pisco quote or final contradiction. Both remain held. Most important Pisco update. Pisco is not upgraded to, quote, anti-Semitic. The criticism is upgraded from a primarily definitional concern to a definitional plus normalization concern, because the expanded Hasan record contains stronger independent examples of anti-Semitic content. A narrow standard, therefore, has more concrete false negative consequences than the first version of the report and what it could demonstrate. Let's look at the next part here. Hasan, direct anti-Semitic content cases. Haredi/Orthodox Jews and inbred. Current independent reporting identifies Hasan's description of some Orthodox Jews as, quote, inbred. AP reports the controversy, and Nexus published a current analysis explicitly acknowledging that Hasan has faced false anti-Semitism accusations while concluding this usage is not one of them. Nexus's reasoning is important. Using the insult against non-Jews does not neutralize its history or meaning when targeted at a Jewish subgroup. Hasan's current response, quote, I never said Jews are inbred, is preserved in full as counter evidence. The narrow scope distinction may be literally relevant if he meant Haredi/Orthodox Jews rather than all Jews. It does not, however, defeat a message level finding about a Jewish subgroup. Saying, quote, not all Jews is different from showing the subgroup targeted hereditary claim was non-anti-Semitic. One more time. Saying, quote, not all Jews is different from showing the subgroup targeted hereditary claim was non-anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitic content supported in identified usage. That's the rating here. High confidence that the dispute exists and that the nexus independently classifies the targeted usage as anti-Semitic. Private motive remains separate. But we remember, we don't need private motive to identify anti-Semitism. Jake Auchincloss and, quote, straight up Israel first. The Boston Globe reports that Representative Jake Auchincloss, who is Jewish, criticized Graham Plattner's Nazi / Totenkopf tattoo as disqualifying. Hasan responded, quote, straight up Israel first. The immediate dispute was Nazi imagery and candidate standards, not Israeli policy. This makes the statement structurally different from calling a pro-Israel position, quote, Israel first. It attributes foreign allegiance motivation to a Jewish politician where the predicate supplied in the exchange was Nazi extremism. Nexus treats dual loyalty / foreign allegiance accusations against Jews as a core anti-Semitism concern when Jewishness supplies the inferential bridge. This report therefore regards the Auchincloss episode as one of the strongest direct cases because it survives the anti-Zionism firewall. So the verdict here is strong anti-Semitic trope structure, dual loyalty concern. So this is a direct piece of evidence of anti-Semitism. So is the one before. What I plan on doing with this report is sending this in an email to Pisco, and I will send it to Stephen Bonnell Destiny as well, so they have the evidence and information. And then I'll be interested if Pisco wants to have a conversation about it. We can talk about that particular evidence, because it does seem like in some of the video footage I've seen, which I would never put that in a report like this, because this is meant to transcend my personal negativity and positivity bias specifically to the data and reference. The biases that are baked into this report are my epistemic biases that rely on correspondence criteria of truth, empiricism, using scientific methods as a way of knowing, that kind of stuff. Sure, you can view that as an epistemic bias, but I would say that these reports are based on what we would consider high resolution, rigorous epistemic standards in philosophy. And and then you will see some things in this report in reference to well-being. I am a moral well-beingist. My moral quest is to maximize well-being, physical, mental, and social health for myself and those around me. That's my higher purpose in life. And so you'll see some reference to well-being calculus in here, and that is my subjective moral preference. I'm just going to fill up my water quickly. Take a second to smash that like button. So glad you're here with me today. All right. Okay. Group essentializing rhetoric. Advocacy compilations also document a formulation describing Israel as a nation of, quote, messianic, inbred, ultra-Orthodox psychopaths. and related hereditary/group pathology rhetoric. Because an advocacy compilation is not a neutral source and exact wording matters, original video should control any publication alleging an exact quote. The message structure itself is relevant. Political criticism becomes group targeted hereditary degradation and collective psychopathology. Let's go to H12. I'm curious to see that. Okay, this comes from an ADL backgrounder on Hasan Piker. Advocacy source used for leads and exact source chasing, not neutral adjudication. Okay. Okay. Number 4, quote, Jewish supremacy and Zionism/Nazism. Why this report does not overclassify. Hasan has publicly used, quote, Jewish supremacy and compared Zionism to fascism/Nazism. These are not scored as automatic anti-Semitism. A phrase such as, quote, Jewish supremacy can refer to an actual Jewish supremacist political ideology. Zionism/Nazism analogies are treated differently by IHRA versus JDA/Nexus. This report therefore codes these as context dependent and often inflammatory, not self-proving evidence of Jew hatred. Direct content synthesis. The Haredi/inbred and Auchincloss/Israel First cases are analytically stronger than generic claims about Hasan's hostility to Israel because neither requires the rule, quote, anti-Zionism is equal to anti-Semitism. They survive frameworks specifically designed to protect Israel criticism, which makes them high-value adversarial falsification cases. So if Pisco's position is, I don't see evidence of anti-Semitism by Hasan Piker, well, we've just identified 2 very strong cases here. Now, maybe Pisco will say, well, yeah, I mean, 2 cases. Does that mean he's anti-Semitic? Not necessarily. There's going to be more things we're going to look at, but 2 cases is at least direct evidence of anti-Semitism based on academic definitions and usages of these terms. We're going to get into the definition issue and the usage issue of terms. If you haven't yet, please smash that like button. Let's look at Hasan, promotion, platforming, and anti-Semitism through others. Number 1, Norm Finkelstein, the strongest guest content case. So we went through this recently. And by the way, for the record, this is actually a good time to bring this up. Let me open this. So this is the most current report from that analysis we did. So anti-Semitism in the script. And this is in reference to the long form conversation Hasan Piker and Norman Finkelstein had on Hasan's show. So this section evaluates rhetoric and propositions, not private intent, motive, character, or clinical psychology. It triangulates 3 non-binding frameworks with different boundaries. IHRA, the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism. That's whenever we see JDA, that's what we're referring to, Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, and Nexus. IHRA includes contextual examples involving Jewish collective power / blame and Nazi comparisons. JDA protects broad, even harsh, evidence-based criticisms of Israel while defining anti-Semitism as hostility / discrimination against Jews as Jews. Nexus similarly distinguishes Israel criticism from anti-Jewish collective guilt and identity denial. So we had many instances of high concern in this conversation. The instances came from predominantly from Norm Finkelstein's mouth. Not all of them, but predominantly. And then the question comes, which we'll look after, is what was Hasan Piker as the host? What was the host reaction? What was the challenge? What was the amplification and facilitation audit? And I think it's important for the sake of this episode to go through this. So anti-Semitism in the transcript. So Norm Finkelstein said the following things. I believe the Jews brought it on themselves. The analysis for this claim is collective blame / victim blame directed at Jews as a group. Specific donor conduct cannot transfer responsibility to, quote, the Jews. IHRA collective blame, JDA hostility prejudice against Jews as Jews, Nexus collective guilt. So in those three organizations, this meets the standard for anti-Semitism. I believe the Jews brought it on themselves. The Jews is the collective blame thing. Why is this a problem? Well, there are Jews living in all parts of the world. All just like any other human being with their own individual beliefs, their own individual hopes and dreams, things going on. When you collectivize people and you say, instead of the Jews, you might say, yeah, that Jewish kid over there in Canada brought this whole thing going on in Israel on themselves. Sounds simple-minded, doesn't it? Yeah. Small-minded, simple-minded. Anti-Semitism. Direct example. They had this conversation like not that long ago, a few weeks ago. So what else did Norm Finkelstein say? These Jewish billionaire supremacists destroyed academic freedom / financial blackmail. Real donor pressure exists, but ethnic aggregation plus billionaire / financial control language tracks a classic Jewish power trope. Converges strongly across IHRA, JDA, and Nexus when read as Jews, collective power, not named donor criticism. So the lack of named donor criticism, the actual specific people, not just the Jews, plus some additional category, it lacks the named donor criticism. So it's anti-Semitic. How about quote from Mr. Norman Finkelstein? Resentment towards Jews, it has a rational foundation. It's hard for me not to read these like in some like cartoony, ridiculous voice because it's just this level of explicit anti-Semitism is just insane, like small-minded, simple-minded. You guys remember that? It reminds me of like a Goomba from like do you guys remember when, what's the actor's name? I can't remember, but there was a 1990s live action Mario movie with John Leguizamo and Bob Hoskins. I think it's Hoskins. And the Goomba characters in that movie have a very small head. That's what I am picturing, a very, very small-headed Goomba saying these statements. So yeah, this is from Norm Finkelstein. You would think this is from 50 years ago, but this is from like days ago. Quote, resentment towards Jews, it has a rational foundation because Jews use, quote, considerable financial power to suppress speech. He's talking about Jews. He's talking about the Jews here on Hasan Piker's podcast. So explicitly rationalizes resentment towards not just some Jews, not just Israeli Jews, toward Jews on a collective financial power premise. Scary stuff. A strong cross-framework anti-Semitism signal. Yeah, this like That one's very obvious, Norm. Norm Finkelstein at around 2 hours and 2 minutes in the conversation. The system is rigged for Jews. Most interviews, most interviewers are Jewish. Jewish applicant defaults to smart. Anti-Semitic stereotypes have no impact. So the unsupported institutional power/privilege generalization coupled with denial of anti-Jewish discrimination effects. This is classic power/privilege trope. Empirical claims separately fail. So just more anti-Semitism. Here we go again. This one's classic. At 1 hour and 57 minutes and 2 seconds, Jews disproportionately occupy positions in industry and culture. This was said by a man a few days ago on a very popular podcaster's stream or video. Hasan Piker, Norm Finkelstein said Jews disproportionately occupy positions, quote, in industry, in culture. Undefined totalization about Jewish control. Oh, he also said in industry, in culture, in everything. Undefined totalization about Jewish control, overrepresentation across, quote, everything. IHRA, power trope, especially direct. JDA/Nexus also capture collective anti-Jewish generalization. If you guys haven't watched this podcast, I mean, it is a clinic on contemporary anti-Semitism that seems to be just acceptable ways of talking about the Jews and Jewish people on that corner of the political spectrum. That's awful. This is horrible. Must be resisted, must be exposed, must be stopped. Norm Finkelstein said, those folks have gone mad, psychotic in their relish, followed by the Jewish people of Israel. So not just the Israeli people, the Jewish people of Israel. You know, there are Arabs in Israel. There are all kinds of people in Israel, but specifically the Jewish people of Israel. Collective pathologizing becomes ethnically marked when shifted from Israeli society to, quote, the Jewish people in Israel. Wow, it looks like Planet Peterson is in. That's cool. Planet Peterson is down to debate Destiny in Vancouver when I have him and Kyla together for some debates the night before his big debate against Ezra Levant. That's exciting. That's going to be a lot of fun. Shout out to Planet Peterson. You guys are talking about the Norm impression. I mean, it took me 6 episodes to go through that video, so I have his. Yeah, I'm kind of a parrot. If you don't know that about me, I'm. There's not many things I'm good at in life, but impersonations are pretty good. Okay, so what did we just do? Oh God, we're getting to these ones. No. Oh, it's so bad that it actually is comical because it feels like it's coming out of the mouth of like someone who does like anti-Semitic humor. Like this would be good for an anti-Semitic humor stand up. Okay, so Norm Finkelstein. Jews do exercise disproportionate power, wealth, and so forth. And that will always be a problem for Jews. Generalized Jewish wealth slash problem is presented as a group problem rather than a actor specific empirical claim. Classic anti-Semitic trope structure, actor boundary absent. See, there's no actor again. It's just the Jews. It's not there's no actor. What Jews specifically? No, it's just the Jews. Anti-Semitism. Uh-oh, this next one is high concern. 95% of anti-Semitism would disappear if Israel stopped calling itself Jewish. Unsupported numerical counterfactual shifts causal responsibility for anti-Jewish hatred toward Israel/Jewish identification. Victim blaming / causal displacement risk across frameworks. Highly anti-Semitic. Zionism compared ideologically to Nazism. Oh, wait, that wasn't the quoted part. Zionism compared ideologically to Nazism. Liberal Zionism is liberal Nazism. Historically flattening and inflammatory, IHRA lists Nazi comparisons as a contextual example. JDA/Nexus do not make such comparisons automatically anti-Semitic. Do not label this anti-Semitic solely with the analogy without context. So if you're asking IHRA, they would, yeah, we need to know the context, but yeah, like in a particular context, if there's a guy just walks up to a Jewish person on the street and says, liberal Zionism, liberal Nazism. So under that context, yeah, this person seems like they're trying to trigger the Jewish person because they happen to be Jewish. This person said it to them. You know, in that context, we would have anti-Semitism. Norm Finkelstein / Hasan. Jewish supremacy or Jewish supremacy used as a universal replacement for Zionism. So this one, again, is context dependent. Criticizing ethno-national legal inequality is not inherently anti-Semitic. Universal replacement can collapse a diverse political ideology into ethnic culpability. Test the underlying legal right structures rather than the slogan. Hasan says, no group are monolithic. That's a good posture. Quote, organized Jewry appears in a counterfactual critique. So exculpatory context. Hasan rejects monolithicity. The phrase must not be clipped and recorded as his endorsement. Attribution firewall prevents a false anti-Semitism finding. Great. This is just pointing out that organized Jewry was mentioned. It's not necessarily like we the phrase not the phrase must be clipped and recorded as his endorsement. Right. Okay. And now this layer is important to understand what Hasan is doing. This layer is important. Hasan Piker, host reaction, challenge, amplification, and facilitation audit. Hasan didn't say a lot in the conversation with Norm Finkelstein. So, but he also didn't push back and challenge particular anti-Semitic things that were being promoted on his widely distributed and influential show. So, purpose and boundary. This section asks a different question from the speaker claim ledger. How did the host respond when Finkelstein advanced false, unsupported, materially misleading, or anti-Semitic propositions? It evaluates moderation behavior without guilt by association. Hasan receives factual responsibility only for claims he clearly adopts or materially advances. Silence, a nod, laughter, quote, yeah, or ordinary conversational accommodation is never sufficient on its own. Live audit evidence rule. Pangburn 6 live stream fact checks are contemporaneous observation records and are especially useful for locating moments of apparent agreement, discomfort, correction, or non-challenge. They are treated as secondary audit evidence. The original episode/transcript controls verbal attribution, and purely visual claims such as a nod or facial expression require the original video rather than an image-based transcript alone. So we have time here. We have Finkelstein proposition and context. We have Hasan response in record. We have reaction code, and then we have the audit's evidentiary consequence. So let's look at the first one. No forensic evidence / no single frame, only possible conclusion from Finkelstein saying sexual violence never happened with regards to October 7th. That's the context here. Hasan responds in record. Hasan answers the archive review time calculation, adds the point that Israel also extracted body camera footage, and then asks why rape / sexual assault became Israel's initial line of attack rather than challenging the non-occurrence inference. So active amplification and facilitation of Hasan is engaging in active amplification and facilitation of the claim that the only possible conclusion due to lack of forensic evidence is that sexual violence never happened. But we know that there is a lot of testimonial evidence. There is a lot of circumstantial evidence. And there was enough evidence for particular organizations to determine that it is almost certainly the case that sexual violence did occur. So Hasan does not explicitly say, quote, rape never happened. So claim 18 remains Finkelstein's false claim, but he materially reinforces the evidentiary frame used to reach it. That's an endorsement. Since we're dealing with anti-Semitism today, let's look at the anti-Semitism claims here. No, quote, no systemic anti-Semitism. Jewish applicants benefit from a system, quote, rigged in their favor. Positive stereotypes have no life cost. Hasan signals broad prior agreement with much of Finkelstein's anti-Semitism discussion and later says they, quote, largely agree, but the scope of that agreement is not clearly tied to every universal claim. So there is affiliative partial agreement. Scope is ambiguous. So we shouldn't transfer all the claims from claim 41 to claim 44 wholesale to Hasan. The exchange does show insufficient real-time separation from several unsupported / false universals. Quote, the Jews brought it on themselves. Jewish billionaire supremacists destroyed academic freedom, donor financial pressure. Hasan does not directly rebuke the ethnic collective framing and contributes examples about lobbying / financial and institutional pressure. So there was a non-challenge. There's an amplification of underlying actor-specific narrative. So real donor pressure evidence can be amplified without adopting, quote, the Jews as a collective agent. Therefore, our report reports facilitation does not assign Finkelstein's ethnic generalization to Hasan. Resentment towards Jews has a rational foundation because of Jewish financial power. Hasan does not instantly interpret sorry, it does not instantly interrupt, then explicitly says, quote, here's where you and I differ, reframes the issue around class slash scapegoating and says, quote, no group of people are monolithic. So there's a delayed challenge and distancing there by Hasan. So strong exculpatory evidence against treating the collective Jewish premise as Hasan's own. It also shows the challenge was delayed until after the core trope had been developed. Let's see. Finkelstein doubles down that, quote, the Jewish people of Israel are mad, psychotic in their relish for destruction. Hasan's generalization challenge immediately precedes the doubling down. Finkelstein rejects the premise of the challenge and ethnicizes the referent. So challenge rejected by Guest, the anti-Semitic collective generalization remains Finkelstein's. Hasan's objection is materially exculpatory context. How about this one? Israeli Jews are not Jews. Jews exercise disproportionate power and wealth. 95% of anti-Semitism would disappear under a different Israeli label. No direct correction of those exact propositions is captured. After the monologue, Hasan says he does not disagree with a large part and redirects towards Zionism/rights. So non-challenge there, ambiguous partial alignment. Broad alignment with the surrounding anti-Zionist argument is not an adoption lock for identity denial, collective Jewish power, or the 95% number. The lack of precise challenge is nevertheless part of the host quality record. So there wasn't a precise challenge there by Hasan. He said he agreed with a large part of that anti-Semitism. Okay, I wanted to go through that from this other report. Let me close this. No, I want that one. Close this. Yeah, here we go. Back to this one. Hopefully you guys are hanging in there. Well, someone said I'd be honestly more interested in Planet Peterson versus Kyla. Kyla uses Christianity as a moral basis in her arguments, and I think Peterson could crush that. Yeah, so that's going to be on the table as well. Peterson just let me know that he's cool doing the Israel-Palestine topic with Destiny, which I think will be great. And then, yeah, I think Kyla, since we have Planet Peterson there, Kyla and Mr. Planet should go head to head as well. Someone said, so this channel is basically a Destiny subreddit, huh? No, you should look at our corpus of live intellectual discussions that have garnered millions upon millions of views that have nothing to do with Destiny. However, I am working with Destiny at the moment. Specifically on the anti-Trump debate tour, debating some people who are sympathetic to Trump. Yeah, that's where that's at. Also, once Destiny gets his, once the court stuff is all finalized and dealt with, if Destiny wants, he has an anti-Hasan debate tour waiting for him. So it would be nice to hear from Hasan's fans that, defend him, that predominantly agree with him on a lot of these issues, and we can have some good faith, helpful debates out on the road together with Hasan fans. I think that would be great. Okay, let's look at this. Now that we've read that information, there's probably going to be a bit of that information repeated, but so Norman Finkelstein, the strongest guest content case. The prior Pangburn official version 2 remains the controlling project audit for the Finkelstein episode. It identified multiple high confidence anti Semitism concerns in Finkelstein's late monologue: Jewish institutional rigging, collective power wealth, rationalized resentment toward Jews, collective pathologizing, denial of Israeli Jews, Jewish identity, and a 95% causal counterfactual that shifted responsibility for anti Semitism toward Israel/Jewish identification, which is pretty insane. Okay, guest proposition that Jews broadly are broadly advantaged / system rigged. There was no immediate full rebuttal captured from Hasan. Norm Finkelstein resentment toward Jews is rational because of Jewish financial power. There was a delayed challenge and distancing from Hasan on that one. Jewish people of Israel have gone mad / psychotic. Generalization challenge immediately precedes guest doubling down. And so there was a challenge there, but the challenge was rejected by Finkelstein. And we're just summarizing what we just went through. Quote, Israeli Jews, they're not Jews. There was no precise correction of the exact claim captured by Hasan. This is an identity denial. Jews exercise disproportionate power / wealth. This is a classic collective power structure. There was no precise direct correction captured by Hasan, so he didn't correct that either. 95% of anti-Semitism would disappear if Israel stopped calling itself Jewish. Unsupported victim blame / causal displacement. There was no precise direct correction by Hasan. There was a broad later agreement. So there was non-challenge, ambiguous partial alignment. Quote, there was never a war, sweeping society generalization. That one, we don't really need it in this particular report. This table is the core protection against guilt by association. It would be false to say Hasan simply endorsed all of Finkelstein's anti-Semitic content. It would also be false to say the host record is clean. Consequential propositions were allowed to develop. Some were never directly corrected, and broad partial affiliation language followed the late cluster. Why delayed correction can still normalize. A large host does not need to believe a trope for platform effects to occur. Audiences may remember the vivid guest proposition more than a later generalizing warning. Pangburn therefore records non-challenge and delayed correction as host quality variables while refusing to put guest claims in Hasan's factual ledger without adoption. And we are looking at Hasan promotion, platforming, and anti-Semitism through others. Let's look at Hamas, Houthi, and Hezbollah-related normalization. Hasan has publicly defended a comparative claim that Hamas is, quote, 1,000 times better than Israel, and later reaffirmed that he means the comparison. He has also spoken sympathetically about Houthi resistance and interviewed a viral Yemeni figure associated with the Houthi maritime campaign. Public sources vary on formal membership, so this report does not overstate that status. Advocacy / media sources document favorable Hezbollah-related rhetoric as well. These are not automatically anti-Semitic statements. They are normalization cases. Hamas, the Houthi movement, and Hezbollah have carried anti-Semitic ideological / rhetorical material. A streamer can support an anti-Israel objective without adopting that material. Nevertheless, responsible promotion requires explicit ideological boundary setting when the movement itself contains anti-Jewish doctrine. Has Hasan successfully created those ideological boundaries between himself and Hamas, Houthis, and Hezbollah? I don't think so. I don't think he has. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section. Has Hasan made it clear, like when he says, like, Hamas is 1,000 times better than Israel? Hamas is riddled with anti-Semitism. The Houthis are as well. So is Hezbollah. So has Hasan given an explicit ideological boundary with regards to the anti-Jewish doctrines that exist within these organizations or groups? Number 4, Anne Frank / Holocaust symbolism. The reported Anne Frank analogy around a pro-Houthi teen is potentially trivializing or symbolically inverted, but it is not Holocaust denial. This report refuses to inflate a rhetorical offense into a different factual category. Alleged shooter manifesto discussion. Hasan's discussion of the alleged Capitol Jewish Museum shooter manifesto and subsequent Twitch enforcement is coded as a platform moderation case. Hasan said he was analyzing the text and debunking false flag narratives. Reading extremist material can be journalistic. The relevant questions are framing, amplification, endorsement, and audience effects. Platform suspension alone does not answer the anti-Semitism merits questions. Supported. Hasan has repeatedly exposed a very large audience to anti-Semitic guest content and extremist-aligned actors / material. Mixed. He sometimes challenges, contextualizes, or distances, and platforming is not itself adoption. Material concern. Inconsistent boundary setting can normalize content even where personal anti-Semitic intent is not established. So you can normalize anti-Semitic content even where your own personal anti-Semitic intent is not established. Someone said, citing a bunch of Hasan info doesn't tie anything to Pisco unless you're aware of him knowing that the info, 60% of this report is irrelevant. Well, the context is very important here because Pisco apparently says he's not sure that there is evidence of anti-Semitism against Hasan. He is welcome to clear that up, but that's a big problem. There's an overwhelming amount of evidence of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic adjacent behavior and the promotion of anti-Semitism with regards to Hasan. This is relevant because he is going out into the world, blowing the whistle and calling foul on people who are pointing out anti-Semitism being promoted by Hasan. So I don't think it's... Yeah, that's fine. He said Pisco said he's open to being convinced of Hasan being anti-Semitic. That's great. He should study this. It's a very important issue before coming out. It's actually, you know what? It's his responsibility. It's his responsibility. That is completely insufficient to sit back and say, well, I'm just going to sit here and continue to say that, you know, there's nothing anti-Semitic or problematic in that category with regards to Hasan because nobody's convinced me yet. Do the fucking research. Do the research. Go convince yourself. Take on some moral responsibility. How about that? How about that? You're a public figure putting this, how many young people do you think are watching what Pisco has to say? I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, like, Pisco's right. Like, yeah, I've seen Hasan. I don't see the anti-Semitism. You got to take on some moral responsibility. Contradiction and consistency ledger. A contradiction is not merely, quote, said something bad and later said something good. The ledger below distinguishes logical contradiction, scope conflict, norm implementation, inconsistency, strategic tension, and non-contradiction. Let's see if we have some conflict here. Okay, we have, for the first area here, we have real definitional conflict. So Pisco, the proposition, Holocaust denial may not be anti-Semitic if subjective intent is absent. There's a contradiction there with what is said by the JDA, by USHMM, operationally classify Holocaust denial as anti-Semitic. The subjective intent, whether that's absent or not, does not matter. These are global standards of anti-Semitism. We have a potential threshold asymmetry here. Pisco uses person-level anti-Semitism label for Fuentes, often frames anti-Semitism through demanding intent analysis in harder cases. So it seems like we have an asymmetry here. There's a tendency to use person-level anti-Semitism label for Fuentes, like, oh, he's obviously anti-Semitic. And then we have this other proposition that seems to be asymmetric, often frames anti-Semitism through demanding intent analysis in harder cases. Pisco allegedly assumes broad mega racism, and then uses a high proof burden for anti-Semitism. I want to do a deeper dive into this one. This is a hold by the Pangburn system. That means I want to dive deeper. On the Vanguard podcast, someone gave the comment, by the way, that on the Vanguard podcast, Pisco referred to Hasan critics as, quote, bad actors. We need to still locate that. Pisco has previously characterized people shaping his audience's Hasan-related criticism as, quote, bad faith actors who lie about me. In his August 2026 Vanguard appearance, he again declined to strongly condemn Hasan and characterized Hasan's net political effect on Democrats as positive. But the present audit has not yet independently verified. Yeah, so for our next draft of the report, we will independently verify that. Pisco defends Hasan's speech rights, but also criticizes Hasan politically. That's not a contradiction. This one isn't either. May prefer Hasan over Trump electorally. Does not endorse every Hasan view. Good. Says he is not anti-Semitic, opposes anti-Semitism, uses identified rhetoric classified as anti-Semitic under... Ooh, okay. Oh, sorry, this is for Hasan. Okay, so for Hasan, yeah, it says he's not anti-Semitic, opposes anti-Semitism, but he uses identified rhetoric classifiable as anti-Semitic under Nexus style criteria. Okay, the rest of these are Hasan. Says no group is monolithic, uses targeted hereditary / collective psychopathology rhetoric. Hasan says, I never said Jews are inbred. Controversy concerns a Haredi Orthodox Jewish subgroup. Frames himself as Hasan frames himself as anti-Zionist, not anti-Semitic, calls Jewish rep Auchincloss, quote, Israel first in a Nazi tattoo dispute with no Israel predicate. Hasan challenges Finkelstein's monolithicity. Okay, we already went through that. Opposes anti-Semitism. Oh, actually, let's go. Challenges Finkelstein's monolithicity / generalization on one hand, and on the other hand, does not directly correct every later Jewish power / identity denial claim. So some of the anti-Semitism is getting through, slipping through for some reason. Opposes anti-Semitism on one hand, and then on the other hand, praises / normalizes Hamas / Houthi / Hezbollah-linked resistance actors. 3 organizations that are just riddled with anti-Semitism. On one hand, Hasan uses Holocaust / Anne Frank symbolism. On the other hand, does not deny the Holocaust. Okay, that's fine. Most important Pisco contradiction question. The strongest potentially score-changing contradiction is not yet adjudicated whether Pisco uses a materially lower intent burden when labeling broad MAGA racism than when classifying left / coalition adjacent anti-Semitism. Secondary reports are insufficient. A primary transcript lock is required before publication as a fact. Yeah, I agree. We're going to add that to our notes. All right. So I asked my system to dive deeper into this one. Pisco allegedly assumes broad MAGA racism, uses a high proof burden for anti-Semitism. Pisco said he assumes every MAGA Republican is racist. So that's a claim. We'll look at the sources. Pisco said, okay, Pisco uses an unusually intent-centered standard for calling a person anti-Semitic. That's supported. Pisco, therefore, has a straightforward definitional double standard between racism and anti-Semitism. We need to still establish that if that's the case. Pisco appears to use a different inferential / evidentiary burden for MAGA racism than coalition adjacent anti-Semitism. This is qualified. There is a substantial symmetry concern. So the MAGA statement is now much better sourced. A contemporaneous Reddit post about the actual Pisco's loaner box conversation provides a direct source link to the original YouTube VOD. The thread was specifically created around that segment. More importantly, multiple people who were discussing the exchange immediately afterward independently describe essentially the same proposition. One writes that Pisco, quote, assumes every MAGA Republican is racist. Another asks how Pisco can say Republicans are racist without demonstrating their intrinsic racial beliefs. A separate later thread independently describes the same moment as Pisco casually saying he assumes all MAGA Republicans are racist. So what I'm going to do is provide the system with this conversation transcript. We're going to look for Pisco and what's his name? Loaner box. This is a 4-hour discussion. Loaner box does pretty good fact checking. Some reasoning errors, some fact checking errors, but generally pretty good. Give me that transcript. I want to eat it. Da, da, da. 181 sheets of paper. Yay! Those are digital sheets, by the way. Let's print it. Let's go loaner. Okay. We're also going to do this work. Transcript for further reference. Why does it always fail to attach the first time? Always. Oh, it was still downloading. Let's take a look. There we go. Now it's ready. I think it was just taking a while to download. It's a big transcript. While that's doing that, I'm going to use the bathroom really quick. Almost time to get a haircut. Almost. That's funny. Someone said, anything that says Hasan is bad is a Destiny subreddit. That's funny. Okay, I gave my system that. Okay, let's look into this. I've given it the that particular conversation. So we are just verifying that Pisco did say that he assumes every mega Republican is racist. I think if he did say that, it's going to be, I wonder how he will square that circle with, not thinking that Hasan is racist or anti-Semitic based on the actual evidence that exists of this. That'll be interesting. Pisco uses an unusually intent-centered standard for calling a person anti-Semitic. That's supported. So yeah, that is supported. So if in fact he did say this, which we will verify that in a minute, there seems to be a double standard. And I'm curious as to why that exists for, Republican racists versus people who are anti-Semitic. All right, his anti-Semitism burden really is unusually intent-centered. Pisco's own Kick page currently hosts a clip titled Holocaust Denial is Not Necessarily Anti-Semitism. The title itself should not automatically be attributed to Pisco. Okay, yeah. The surrounding contemporaneous accounts are remarkably consistent about the conceptual argument. Listeners describe Pisco as distinguishing anti-Semitic effects / content from a person possessing the internal mental state required for Pisco to call that person an anti-Semite. So one detailed description says the conduit discussion reached the proposition that rhetoric could increase anti-Semitism without the speaker necessarily being personally bigoted, followed by the Holocaust denial hypothetical. Another discussion reconstructs Pisco's usage as specifically narrowing, quote, racist or, quote, anti-Semitic to a person's subjective state of mind as opposed to discriminatory outcomes. And this isn't merely an intent standard versus Pisco disagreement. There are rigorous anti-Semitism classification methodologies that explicitly do not make the disseminator's subjective intent controlling. Jekeli, Kavar, and Meiling's methodology for annotating anti-Semitic online content says classification should focus on the message in context with reference made explicit rather than requiring proof of the disseminator's intent. So why is this standard being applied by Pisco? The strongest contradiction here is about inference, not definition. There are three separate questions that the earlier report that we compressed together. What does racist or anti-Semitic mean? Entailment. Does behavior X necessarily prove the corresponding internal attitude? Probabilistic inference. When is the evidence strong enough that we should reasonably infer the internal attitude? The mega statement is especially revealing because he reportedly said assume. Ironically, assume makes the comparison better. He apparently isn't saying membership in MAGA logically entails racism. He's saying something closer to MAGA membership is such strong evidence of racism that I'm comfortable beginning with a racist hypothesis. That means Pisco understands exactly the epistemic concept his critics are applying to anti-Semitism. Observable evidence leads to prior probability, leads to reasonable inference about latent attitude. You rarely obtain direct access to another person's prejudice. Nearly all ordinary judgments about racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, religious hatred, corruption, dishonesty, etc. involve inference from patterns of conduct. The Pangburn standard does not require certainty. It asks whether the posterior confidence is proportionate to the evidence. So the key question for Pisco becomes, why is group membership in MAGA sufficient for a sweeping probabilistic inference about racist mental states, while repeated anti-Semitism relevant conduct by particular left-wing figures is apparently insufficient to produce an analogous probabilistic inference? I'm going to give you guys this. According to the contemporaneous thread, the MAGA / Dixiecrat discussion came directly after an approximately hour-long argument over anti-Semitism, and commenters immediately noticed the contrast. The thread's original poster describes the juxtaposition explicitly. That substantially increases its forensic value. We aren't comparing Pisco in 2019 on racism versus Pisco in 2026 on anti-Semitism. We're apparently observing the two evidentiary styles in essentially the same conversational environment. Okay, yeah. So I have been able to verify that in the transcript, he did say, I basically assume MAGA Republicans are racist. Okay. So there does seem to be a double standard at play here. And then the next question is why? Why the double standard? Someone just said, what anti Semitic activity? I've already gone through it. Who is the person? Duke Hugo. I've already gone through it. Do you need to hear it again? Two easy, obvious examples: Haredi / Orthodox Jews and, quote, inbred. Current independent reporting identifies Hasan's description of some Orthodox Jews as, quote, inbred. AP reports the controversy, and Nexus published a current analysis explicitly acknowledging that Hasan has faced false anti-Semitism accusations, while concluding this usage is not one of them. This particular usage is not one of the false anti-Semitism accusations. Nexus's reasoning is important. Using the insult against non-Jews does not neutralize its history or meaning when targeted at a Jewish subgroup. Hasan's current response, quote, I never said Jews are inbred, is preserved in full as counter evidence. The narrow scope distinction may be literally relevant if he meant Haredi / Orthodox Jews rather than all Jews. It does not, however, defeat a message level finding about a Jewish subgroup. Saying, quote, not all Jews is different from showing the subgroup targeted hereditary claim was non-anti-Semitic. So, yeah, that is anti-Semitism. Also, that Jake Auchinclose and, quote, straight up Israel first is anti-Semitic. The Boston Globe reports that Representative Jake Auchinclose, who is Jewish, criticized Graham Plattner's Nazi / Totenkopf tattoo as disqualifying. Hasan responded, quote, straight up Israel first. The immediate dispute was Nazi imagery and candidate standards, not Israeli policy. This makes the statement structurally different from calling a pro-Israel position, quote, Israel first. It attributes foreign allegiance motivation to a Jewish politician where the predicate supplied in the exchange was Nazi extremism. Nexus treats dual loyalty / foreign allegiance accusations against Jews as a core anti-Semitism concern when Jewishness supplies the inferential bridge. This report, therefore, regards the Auchinclose episode as one of the strongest direct cases because it survives the anti-Zionism firewall. So this is strong anti-Semitic trope structure and dual loyalty concern. Also, we went over all of the problematic anti-Semitic things, some endorsed by Hasan in his conversation with Norm Finkelstein. You can find all that information. I put it all at peng-burn.com/analysis. Hasan didn't adopt everything and agree with everything Norm Finkelstein said, which, by the way, Norm Finkelstein is just an explicit, overt anti-Semite. That's just clear. That one conversation, just stack them up. I have a long list of anti-Semitism by Norm Finkelstein in that conversation. And then the question is, with all of that anti-Semitism that Norm Finkelstein is espousing on Hasan's show, how much of it is getting pushback? Well, not enough. Some of it did. And Hasan responded with, no people are a monolith. But some of the stuff he nodded along with and was sympathetic to it. And some of the stuff he made no response to and just allowed Norm Finkelstein to air his anti-Semitism on his show. And this idea that there's no specific gap being made explicit by Hasan between Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah, and their overt, explicit anti-Semitism, because Hasan is speaking apologetically of these groups right here. Hamas, Houthi, and Hezbollah related normalization. Where is the explicit ideological boundary setting when the movement itself, this movement, the Hamas, Houthi, and Hezbollah movement, contains anti-Jewish doctrine? Where is the explicit ideological boundary being stated by Hasan between him and that? So anti-Semitism isn't just somebody, screaming the Jews and basically doing what Norm Finkelstein does. It's not only that, it's about the promotion of it, the platforming of it, the lack of, if you want to say some positive things about Hamas, Houthi, and Hezbollah, saying that Hamas is 1,000 times better than Israel, and not explicitly state that, an ideological boundary between you, Hamas, and anti-Jewish doctrine. There's anti-Semitism. There's levels of anti-Semitism in all of this. Okay, we went through the contradiction and consistency ledger. We have 45 deep case studies here. The case studies separate conduct type, proposition, framework, and response. They intentionally preserve exculpatory evidence beside incriminating evidence. So Pisco, let's look at case A. Holocaust denial, modal possibility versus operational classification. The strongest defense of Pisco is logical. It is possible to imagine a Holocaust denier whose internal psychology is confusion, contrarianism, or severe delusion rather than conventional Jew hatred. That defeats a universal claim about hidden motive. The problem is relevance. JDA and USHMM classify Holocaust denial / minimalization as anti-Semitic because of the content and historical social phenomena, not because each individual mind has been forensically searched. So this is a definitional underreach. The modal caveat is logically defensible, but operationally misleading if used as the main answer. So if you are going to make the argument, yeah, it's logically possible that someone could be engaging in Holocaust denial because they have, they're confused, they're contrarian, just playing at it, or they suffer from severe delusion. Anyone trying to argue against modal possibility just right off the bat based on classical logic that's going to be a failing game. That's true about everything. But why isn't Pisco applying that standard to MAGA racists? He's fine not leaning into modal possibility for them. And we should be referencing the organizations around the world that are tasked with classifying anti-Semitism and identifying anti-Semitism and fighting against anti-Semitism, unless someone is going to try and create some global control theory about how the Jews are controlling that definition. That's a dark road to go down. Pisco, Nick Fuentes as a threshold contradiction test. Pisco has publicly called Nick Fuentes clearly anti-Semitic in a speaker-attributed transcript, while distinguishing that from whether Fuentes was Hitler's exact ideology. This is important exculpatory evidence. Pisco does not literally require a confession of hatred before making a personal level judgment. The unresolved issue is symmetry. What evidence threshold he applies to coalition adjacent figures? So where is the evidentiary threshold for Nick Fuentes? What has Nick Fuentes done in Pisco's view that has removed this seemingly, modal possibility or high standard of needing to know the intent? How does he know Nick Fuentes' mind? How does he know his intent? Pisco, Trump versus Hasan electoral preference. A binary electoral hypothetical can show coalition preference without showing worldview adoption. The relevant normalization question is downstream. Repeated strategic defense can raise Hasan's legitimacy even where Pisco disagrees with him. That effect must be analyzed separately from personal belief. So there isn't an established wide-stretching ideological endorsement by Pisco for Hasan. There is a strategic support that is supported by the evidence. Let's see. Here's some exculpatory evidence. Pisco publicly criticizes Hasan's political/economic framing and has devoted long-form content to the question of how Democrats should relate to Hasan. This weakens any claim that Pisco is simply a Hasan loyalist or uncritical propagandist. Let's see. Pisco, intent versus message level anti-Semitism. Law often asks about intent because intent changes liability. Social classification of a trope is a different task. A message can reproduce a known anti-Semitic structure even when the speaker claims benign motive or uses the same insult on other groups. Academic annotation work likewise demonstrates that anti-Semitic content can be coded from message/context without treating private intent as the sole necessary criterion. Let's see, these are all functional normalization. Let's see. All of this is going to be available on our website at peng-burn.com/analysis. Someone's saying Pisco is going through psychotic breaks where he doesn't realize how obvious his bias is to lowering every bar to imaginary realms before it's anti-Semitic. Well, we should also address your bias, right? Like, you're saying he's going through psychotic breaks. You don't know that. You don't have access to his mind. You don't have access to his doctoral records, right? So don't start committing the same issues you're claiming other people are dealing with. Hasan Haredi/Orthodox, quote, inbred rhetoric. This is the strongest current message level case because it does not depend on equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. AP reports the controversy in Nexus, a framework that explicitly rejects many false accusations against Israel critics. Says calling Haredi Jews, quote, inbred reproduces a historical trope, even if Hasan uses the insult against other groups. So that is direct evidence of anti-Semitic content supported in identified usage. So for anyone that says there is no evidence of Hasan, committing anti-Semitism, there's evidence right there. Case S, Hasan, quote, messianic inbred ultra-Orthodox psychopaths. The reported formulation compounds religious subgroup identification, hereditary degradation, and collective psychopathology. Because the exact wording comes through an advocacy compilation, original video remains the final arbiter of disputes. Its message level structure is nevertheless substantially more concerning than ordinary policy criticism. So there's a strong anti-Semitism concern here. We already went through this one, but one more time again. Hasan, Jake Auchinclose, and quote, Israel first. The Boston Globe reports that Jewish Representative Jake Auchincloss criticized Graham Plattner's Nazi/Tokenpop tattoo, and Hasan responded, quote, straight up Israel first. Israel was not the immediate subject of Auchincloss's objection. That gives the statement a classic foreign allegiance/dual loyalty structure rather than a normal response to an Israel policy argument. Strong direct trope case for Hasan. Hasan, Hezbollah sympathy. Public compilations document favorable rhetoric toward Hezbollah-related resistance symbolism. Hezbollah has a deep record of anti-Semitic ideology, but liking a flag, actor, or resistance objective cannot be converted automatically into private Jew hatred. The platforming/normalization question remains legitimate. Hasan Finkelstein, Jewish identity denial. Finkelstein says Israeli Jews are, quote, not Jews. This is a high confidence identity denial example. No precise Hasan correction of that exact proposition is captured in the late segment. His earlier generalization challenges material counter evidence, but does not erase the moderation gap. So guest anti-Semitism, strong. Hasan, non-challenge. So that was a negative host signal. This was when Finkelstein was talking about, like, back in my day, the Jews were like a kind of like a dorky person. I'm paraphrasing, but they looked like this. They were really good at these things, and this is that. Now, if you look at Israel, at those Jews, they're not Jews. That is paraphrasing what Finkelstein was talking about. And there was no challenge or correction by Hasan. So again, you'll be able to find this document at pang-burn.com/analysis. All right. There's also a 96 unit claim adjudication ledger here. So there'll be things like, okay, the claim that Pisco personally displays direct anti-Jewish animus in the reviewed corpus. That was not established. No high confidence direct public example located. Definitional underreach is not equivalent to hatred. Then we also have a 144 unit behavior / platform ledger. People can skim through that. One thing you can do is if you're using an LLM model of your own, or if you want to just go through it, you can create your own reports from all of this compiled information. What this report does and does not classify as anti-Semitism. So Holocaust denial / minimization would be considered anti-Semitic content. The reason is because we look at cross-framework / historical convergence. Private motive need not be proven. So that is the global, what I would consider the global academic standard. Jews collectively control institutions / wealth / media. This is anti-Semitic when actor boundary collapses to Jews as Jews. This is classic collective power structure. Rationalizing resentment towards Jews because of Jewish power. That is anti-Semitic. Collective blame plus prejudice justification. Denying someone is Jewish because of political views. That's an anti-Semitic concern. Identity denial based on politics. Foreign Israel allegiance imputed to a Jew without a relevant Israel predicate. That's strong dual loyalty concern. Jewish identity supplies the inferential bridge. And others here. So here's the Pangburn well-being analysis, why normalization matters. Pangburn well-being evaluates physical, mental, and social flourishing while tracking autonomy, truthfulness, power, duration, scale, distribution, and reversibility. Anti-Semitic content analysis therefore has two independent questions. What proposition is being expressed, and what predictable social effects follow from its repetition or legitimation? Variable, Pisco relevance, Hasan relevance, and Pangburn consequence. So truth ecology. Pisco relevance. Overly intent-centered definitions can misclassify historically known phenomena. Hasan relevance. Holocaust / anti-Semitism framing and group generalizations influence audience epistemics. Pangburn consequence. Definitions should maximize discrimination between true positives and false positives. Target group mental / social health. Pisco relevance. Underclassification can communicate that classic tropes are merely debatable semantics. This is a big problem. Underclassification can communicate that classic tropes of anti-Semitism are merely debatable semantics. Hasan, large audience hereditary / dual loyalty rhetoric can increase stigma and social threat. The Pangburn consequence, target harm matters even without proof of conscious hatred. So the harm matters even if someone wasn't meaning to be hateful or they don't actually have hatred. Civil liberty, strong from the Pisco perspective, strong protection for unpopular speakers is a genuine good. Hasan's relevance. Hasan's rights remain rights regardless of content judgment. Pangburn consequence. Do not solve hate speech by abandoning viewpoint neutral rights without a separate legal case. Again, do not solve hate speech by abandoning viewpoint neutral rights without a separate legal case. Scale. Pisco's audience / coalition influence can provide reputational shelter. Hasan's very large audience multiplies exposure. Scale increases consequence, not factual guilt. Correction quality. For Pisco, clear operational definition could reduce ambiguity. Clear operational definition could reduce ambiguity. That operational definition should be consistent with global academic standards. That would be my prescription to Pisco. Delayed or selective challenge can leave vivid tropes socially intact. This is for Hasan. Delayed or selective challenge can leave vivid tropes socially intact. The Pangburn consequence: correction should be prompt, proposition specific, and as salient as the original claim. Coalition incentives: Pisco. Anti-Trump strategy may make correction of allies costly. Hasan. Anti-Israel coalition can make boundary setting against extremist allies costly. The Pangburn consequence: symmetry is most important when correction hurts one coalition. Symmetry is most important when correction hurts one's coalition. Reversibility: Pisco. A published definition can be revised easily. And again, that public definition should be consistent with global academic standards of anti-Semitism. Hasan. Because if you just invent definitions that aren't related to common usages or academic usages or global usages that are used to determine these things at the global level, then what are you doing? Pisco surely wouldn't do that when it comes to legal terminology. This is just as important. Got to say quick goodnight to my baby. I fell with my son the other day while I was walking down our hill to go and look at banana plants and stuff. And I took all of his weight, basically centered on one part of my back. And I think I did something probably more serious than just scrapes and bruises. Hasan, viral group rhetoric and normalization can persist after correction. People can be doing apologetics by way of definition, and that can get really dangerous. If people are using an exotic definition for something as important as anti-Semitism classification, we need to ask why they're doing that. What if they're an academic, which Pisco is, that's my understanding, he should understand why it's important to actually be using these terms as they're used in our highest schools of learning, in our highest, I would say, where anti-Semitism becomes legally applicable, including on the global stage. Not just, making up this idea that you need to know the intent in order for that to be equal to anti-Semitism or for that to gain the label of anti-Semitism. How are you guys doing? Let me take a look at the chat. Someone said, I think you'll find Destiny and a lot of political pundits are more Islamophobic than Hasan is anti-Semitic by these standards. So this is just whataboutism. That isn't, and then you say, and these pundits are barely being called out at all for this. Yeah, but we're focusing on Pisco and Hasan right now, and you're bringing up Destiny. This is about getting to the bottom of this particular issue. And the question today, topic today is Pisco can't see Hasan Piker anti-Semitism. We're trying to figure out why he can't see that. And yeah, you can, we can run a report to see if that's true about Destiny and others with regards to Islamophobia. But we also have to look at, we are going to use the academic, globalized definitions, usages of what Islamophobia is. We're not just going to make up our own standard that it can only be Islamophobic if I can know the intent of the mind of the person. That's ridiculous. Let's look at the. Gotta stretch some kind of stitch in my side. Strongest steel man for Pisco. He is right that anti-Semitism accusations are often overextended into anti-Zionism and harsh Israel criticism. JDA Nexus confirm the need for a narrow boundary. This is, if you look at the JDA and Nexus websites, they go above and beyond. And I think these, the applications and usages of anti-Semitism at the academic level, at the global level, go above and beyond to make sure it's clear that harsh criticisms of Israel and anti-Zionist rhetoric are not automatically equated to anti-Semitism. The context does matter. Sometimes some things that are anti-Zionism or critiques of Israel, sometimes those can be delivered in a context that would be anti-Semitic. But those things in and of themselves don't make something anti-Semitic. Pisco's attorney-style focus on intent is valuable for discrimination claims and for avoiding mind reading. So, yeah, if we're talking about for someone to be charged with discrimination, yeah, valuable. But the legal standard is not the social scientific standard of anti-Semitism. That could be one of the big conflations here, because he is an attorney, I believe. He has explicitly identified Nick Fuentes as anti-Semitic, proving he is not conceptually unable to use the category. His First Amendment defense of Hasan is a principled civil liberties position, not evidence of endorsement. He publicly criticizes Hasan, weakening a blanket coalition cover theory. He allows long-form critics to press his definitions, creating real correction opportunities. No direct Pisco anti-Jewish animus, slur, collective guilt, or identity denial pattern was found in the expanded corpus. Strongest critique of Pisco. He appears to let a legalistic motive standard dominate a social content classification problem, producing false negative risk. Holocaust denial is the clearest example where a modal edge case can obscure the operational classification used by frameworks that are otherwise protective of Israel critics. The Fuentes example raises a legitimate symmetry question. If he can infer anti-Semitism from a far-right public pattern, why should coalition-adjacent cases require qualitatively stronger internal state proof? His strategic/civil liberties support for Hasan is not wrongdoing, but when paired with definitional underreach, it can provide reputational shelter for actual trope-level content. That is anti-Semitic trope-level content. A robust standard should explicitly distinguish message anti-Semitism, discriminatory intent, person-level label, and functional normalization rather than treating them as one binary question. The alleged mega racism asymmetry could materially worsen the score if primary evidence confirms structurally different burdens. The version 2 of this report correctly holds it unresolved. We have resolved it. We resolved it live on the air. So the mega racism asymmetry does exist. He has said that he just assumes anyone who's MAGA is racist. Or I believe the exact quote was, let's see. I basically assume MAGA Republicans are racist. So there's just a basic assumption there when it comes to MAGA racists, but there's this high definitional burden for anti-Semitism, at least for Hasan Piker, but when applied to Nick Fuentes, who is a political other, it seems much easier to apply that label of anti-Semitism. Strongest steel man for Hasan. He has explicitly rejected Jewish monolithicity and publicly denies anti-Semitism. Many attacks on him improperly equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. JDA nexus boundaries protect substantial parts of his Israel criticism. He challenged Finkelstein at important points rather than simply endorsing the guest's entire monologue. Generic use of abrasive insults against many groups is relevant counter evidence against a simple theory of unique anti-Jewish motive. Platforming controversial actors can be journalistic or adversarial. Hosting is not adoption. His Hamas/Houthi/Hezbollah politics can be criticized as extremist normalization without automatically turning every such view into anti-Semitism. Strongest critique of Hasan. The Haredi/Orthodox, quote, inbred rhetoric is a direct Jewish subgroup hereditary trope and an alternative framework that rejects many false accusations still classifies it as anti-Semitic. The Auchincloss, quote, Israel first attack redirects a Jewish congressman's Nazi symbol objection into foreign allegiance suspicion with no immediate Israel predicate. His own anti-monolithicity principle is not consistently applied to Jewish subgroups when rhetoric becomes hereditary or collectively psychopathologizing. He gave Finkelstein an enormous platform for classic Jewish power, blame, and identity denial content. Correction was delayed or absent for several exact propositions. Positive rhetoric toward Hamas/Houthi/Hezbollah aligned resistance can normalize movements with explicit anti-Semitic ideological histories unless boundary setting is conspicuous, which it is not based on my study this far. That those boundaries between Hasan and Hamas, Houthi, Hezbollah with regards to the blatant anti-Semitism that exists in those organizations, those boundaries seem to be non-existent. His scale magnifies the consequences of ambiguous or trope-level rhetoric, making prompt and specific correction more important. The fact that some allegations are false or politically motivated cannot serve as a blanket defense against the strongest independently supported cases. That is, the independently supported cases against Hasan, against Hasan's anti-Semitism. There's a sensitivity analysis. We don't need to go through that. Pangburn recommendations for Pisco. publish a stable 4-part definition distinguishing anti-Semitic content, anti-Semitic intent, discriminatory conduct, and person-level anti-Semitism. I think this should be consistent with global usages in our high courts, academic usages of these terms. That's what these organizations use that we've been referencing in this report, like USHMM, Holocaust Denial and Anti-Semitism, JDA, Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, Nexus Guide to Identifying Anti-Semitism in Debates About Israel. So IHRA working definition, these organizations. For Pisco, state explicitly that Holocaust denial is anti-Semitic content, even if bizarre edge cases make subjective hatred non-necessary in every imaginable speaker. Run a symmetry audit. Apply the same intent/evidence ladder to racism, Islamophobia, anti-LGBTQ+, prejudice, and anti-Semitism across left-right coalitions. When defending Hasan's rights, pair the rights defense with proposition-level condemnation, where the content crosses the line. This makes civil liberties symmetry clearer, not weaker. Publish source-locked clips/transcripts for the current loaner box/conduit definition dispute, so secondary community summaries cannot control the record. Distinguish, quote, I cannot prove this person hates Jews from, quote, this statement reproduces an anti-Semitic trope. Use JDA/Nexus as adversarial constraints precisely because they protect anti-Zionist speech. When even those frameworks identify a trope, address it directly. For Hasan, something on my lower right side is killing me. I don't know what. For Hasan, retire hereditary/group pathology insults aimed at Jewish subgroups. Generic reuse against others does not neutralize target-specific history. Correct the Auchincloss, quote, Israel first framing directly and acknowledge why injecting Israel into a Jewish politician's Nazi tattoo objection creates a dual loyalty structure. When hosting guests who shift from named lobbies/donors to, quote, the Jews, interpret the actor boundary collapse immediately rather than after the trope is fully developed. When praising Hamas, Houthi, or Hezbollah-aligned resistance, explicitly reject anti-Semitic ideological components, so political sympathy is not allowed to launder them. Use the anti-monolithicity principle already articulated in the Finkelstein interview as a universal pre-publication check. Make corrections as salient as the original rhetoric. Viral claims should receive viral corrections, not only defensive replies in niche arguments. Keep anti-Zionism actor specific. Governments, laws, parties, lobbies, donors, and militants can be criticized without hereditary/collective language about Jews. There's a final integrated verdict here. Oh. But I have something going on my lower right side, so I'm going to wrap this up. Hopefully I'm not dying. Well, thanks for being with me going through this, everyone. Really appreciate it. There's a self-audit and source registry in this report as well. This is going to get posted on our website. I don't think there's any major corrections that need to be made. I think there's just the one with regards to the claims about MAGA. But yeah, thanks for being with me for all of this. I mean, my conclusion at the end is that there seems to be a double standard at play. That's this usage of anti-Semitism for some reason is getting this special category of difficulty when employing the label that, say, racism doesn't get, but it seems to not be getting employed with that difficult definitional standard of intent when it's harnessed against people like Nick Fuentes. So my conclusion is Pisco, who I really don't know that much about, really needs to clean this up. This is an important thing to get right. My understanding is Pisco is a legal professional, and he should apply the same rigor that the legal profession in general demands of someone when it comes to using the academically coherent and correct usages of terms and definitions, and and clear up some of these discrepancies. Okay, well, thanks everyone. I really appreciate it. Please make sure you're out there maximizing well-being for yourself and those around you, and I'll see you guys on